The infamous e-collar debate. The dog training world's equivalent of arguing whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Some people treat it like it's the holy grail, while others react as if you suggested teaching your dog to fetch with a cattle prod. But are e-collars really as cruel as some claim? Or is this just all barking up the wrong tree? Sorry. In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into e-collars. I'll explain how they work, why you might consider using one, what the science says, and whether these things can really be a lifesaver or just something you'd rather leave in the box with your old VHS tapes of Debbie Does Dallas. Right, okay, so let's start with the basics. E-collars, also known as shock collars, which sounds way more ominous, are basically a two-piece set. There's a receiver, which goes on the dog's neck, and there's the remote, which you hold like you're some sort of James Bond villain about to release a shark with lasers on their heads. Press a button, and the receiver emits what we call a stim. And before we get carried away, this stim ranges in intensity from a tickling sensation that's barely perceivable to pins and needles, all the way up to, well, that's like touching a fucking stock fence. It's like having a volume knob that goes from a gentle nudge to a firm prod. So why are e-collars such a widely debated topic? You see, one camp of dog trainers will tell you that e-collars are the dog training equivalent of putting stabilizers on a bike, helpful for when you need a bit of guidance and added security. Others, however, will argue it's more like trying to get your child to behave with one of those exploding collars from that movie Running Man. It really does depend on who you ask and their personal experience with them, but we'll come on to that shortly. With so many modern dog training techniques available, why would anyone opt for an e-collar? Well, one of the main arguments is that dogs respond best to tactile feedback. Physical cues are often more effective than visual or auditory ones. An e-collar allows you to provide those physical cues even from a distance, which is especially useful if your dog is off leash. This leads us to one of the biggest advantages of e-collars, the ability to offer reliable off-leash freedom. And I know some might argue otherwise, but I'll address those arguments shortly. These are especially useful for adrenaline-inducing situations. But before we dive deeper, let's address how we actually teach recall. Before we continue, it's probably worth mentioning that I'm a huge advocate for positive reinforcement training. I'm always pushing for more motivational based methods in dog training. My work as a behavior consultant, a dog sport competitor, and a mentor to other dog trainers has required me to master the use of positive reinforcement to its fullest potential. So much so that I often get scrutinized online for using too much reward. I was even stopped on the street once by an elderly gentleman who was concerned with how many treats I was giving my young dog. But as I'll demonstrate later in this video, as powerful as positive reinforcement can be, it doesn't always take us the full distance. Contrary to popular belief, e-collars aren't used to teach recall, only to reinforce it when it fails.
Think of it like a seatbelt. It doesn't teach you how to drive, it doesn't tell you where to go. It's just there in case you ever need it. And hopefully you don't, but if you did, it's probably going to be an uncomfortable experience, but it might just save your life, like an e-collar might save your dog's.
So let me walk you through how I teach recall using positive reinforcement. First, set aside the treats for now and have your dog work for their regular meals. We call this appetite adjustment, especially useful if your dog tends to be a bit picky with food. Be sure you're using high quality food here. You can download our free food guide via the link in the description. 2 sessions a day, making each day incrementally harder until you're able to get your dog's focus for their basic meals in a very low distraction environment, such as your garden. Once you can do that, you're ready for step 2. Next, we charge the whistle using the Newton's cradle method, which helps your dog develop a sharp 180-degree response to their recall. You might want to use something tastier for this, but remember to balance out the extra treats by removing an equivalent amount of kibble from their daily meals. I usually go back to bowl feeding my dog once a day at around 7 p.m. at this point, and I use a slow feeder so that food isn't technically free. And finally, step 3, once your dog has an understanding of the whistle, it's time to head out and test their recall around different levels of distraction. Start with green distractions, then move up to amber, and finally to red. Progress only when your success rate is 85% or higher, and use a long line to manage any failed attempts. You can incorporate toys when the distractions increase. And this method is effective with most dogs we train in the face of most distractions. Keyword there, most, not all. And this is where we encounter the big but in dog training. And I mean a bigger but than Nicki Minaj. Let's talk about prey drive. Prey drive refers to your dog's natural instinct to chase, catch, and possibly kill moving objects like squirrels, deer, or even your neighbor's cat. This instinct is deeply rooted into their evolutionary survival mechanisms. And if it wasn't, it'd be a pretty significant canine design flaw. And when prey drive kicks in, adrenaline floods your dog's system, dampening their senses. This includes their ability to hear your recall command. Whenever your dog is at liberty, they're going to naturally gravitate to whatever they find most valuable. And here's where it's our job as dog owners to make sure our recall command, and in turn our value, is as high as it possibly can be. And using the methods outlined above, we should be able to do this. But once our value is compromised, our dog is going to do what comes natural to them, and that's gravitate towards the value. With the methods outlined above, we can create a super valuable recall, which in turn can trump distraction time and time again. But each dog does have their Achilles heel. And for a lot of dogs, that's anything that triggers their prey drive. And this is where this pile starts to look like this. That was too much. But it's done now. And when this happens, we're lost without a paddle, and the repercussions of our dog failing to come back to us at that pivotal moment might have dire consequences. When a dog is in what we call prey lock, no amount of high-value treats or verbal commands will stop them. In my experience as a dog trainer, a well-conditioned e-collar is often the only way to snap them out of this state safely. This phenomenon has been documented repeatedly online. Some dog trainers make bold claims that they can achieve as strong a recall using reward-based methods alone. But these claims rarely come with video evidence, if ever, and that always makes me skeptical. If this has worked for you and your dog, that's great, and I'm glad you're able to get there. But not every dog has the same genetics, desire to chase, history of reinforcement, temperament, learning environment, food drive. The list goes on. For example, the so-called holy grail of reward-based training, known as predation substitute trainer, coined by Simone Muller, has its own Instagram page showcasing hundreds of videos of dogs recalling from various high-level distractions. However, a keen eye will notice that 99.9% of the dogs featured are still on leash, which kind of defeats the purpose. You and I both know that our dogs are well aware when they're no longer on a long line. Even our friend Zach George struggles to achieve reliable recall without using some sort of aversive, but I'm going to talk more about that in my next video. And I know I may have come across as harsh just now, but I think it's important we hold dog trainers accountable for their bold claims. With video phones so readily available, why wouldn't you document your evidence to support your claims and in turn safeguard dogs? I'm skeptical because I'm yet to see compelling evidence for alternative methods for the majority of high drive dogs in the presence of prey. And I suspect I might be waiting for a while, but my inbox is always open if you want to prove me wrong. So in the name of transparency, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, e-collars work because they provide momentary discomfort to interrupt your dog's behavior. But let me pose this question. Would you hesitate to vaccinate your dog against a disease, even if the odds of them contracting something nasty is slim? Of course not, because you know it's in their best interest. And every time this topic comes up, people will argue till they're blue in the face that the scientific consensus disagrees with the use of e-collars. But how strong really is that argument? Let's take a look at the most cited e-collar studies. First up, we got the Lincoln study. This study compared stress responses in dogs trained with e-collars versus reward-based methods. While the e-collar group showed higher stress levels in their body language, their cortisol levels, that's a stress hormone, did not increase. However, this study did have a major design flaw. It didn't measure the success of training itself. There was no clear training goal or evaluation if the dogs actually learned anything. If that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. Second, then we have the China study. This was essentially a follow-up to the Lincoln study and based around observation of the video footage released from its predecessor. So it suffers from the same limitations. The researchers have refused to disclose the footage from the study to this day. Number 3, we have Blackwell 2008. Although not focused around e-collars themselves, it's often cited against aversive methods. This study was a questionnaire of 192 dog owners. While it found correlation between anxiety and aggression with aversive methods, it didn't determine whether these behaviors were caused by the training methods or if the methods were used because of existing behavioral problems. In other words, it's a chicken and egg scenario. And before we have the Gaultier study, similar findings, but did actually find that dogs with e-collars had more reliable recall, but unfortunately the study was limited to a low distraction environment, making it difficult to measure efficacy at all. After all, potentially the strongest argument for an e-collar is their effectiveness under high distraction. And number 5, we've got a 2012 study by Blackwell again, once more based on a survey of dog owners with no control group for comparison and no direct observation of dogs or training. While the study suggested that e-collars can negatively impact a dog's welfare, it didn't take into account how the e-collar was used, introduced, or variations in brand and style, leaving the findings open to scrutiny. So does the scientific consensus really disagree with e-collars? Honestly, it's hard to say. There isn't a single study that's measured the use of e-collars over a prolonged period of time, and none of the research has explored how effective they are when paired with positive reinforcement. It's always e-collars versus reward-based methods, never alongside reward-based methods. To be blunt, the studies that do exist are so poorly conducted that in any other industry, they probably wouldn't have received approval in the first place. Remember, we don't teach with the e-collar. We do that with positive reinforcement. We just overlay the e-collar as insurance later on down the line. The studies that did observe actual training did find that the dogs trained with an e-collar did experience more short-term stress than those that were trained without. And I'm not arguing otherwise. The application of short-term acute stress to teach the dog a concept of obligatory recall in order to provide your dog a more fulfilling, enriching life because they're able to be let off lead, because they are safer to those around them, and as importantly, themselves. That's a trade-off I'm willing to take. For the sake of argument, let's assume e-collars are effective and the science against them is either wrong or flawed. Can't I just keep my dog on lead, you might say, or can't I just use a long line? Sure, you can, but that's not what I want for my dog, nor do most of my clients. A long line is an accident waiting to happen, and if my dog bolts after a squirrel, one of us is going to get hurt, whether that's attached to a collar or a harness or whatever else. Plus, the experience on a long line just doesn't compare to your dog being off lead. Dogs love to chase, sniff, dig, and play, but it's tough for them to enjoy that freedom while a long line is constantly wrapping around trees, my legs, or even other dogs every couple of minutes. Whether we like it or not, many behavioral issues such as reactivity and aggression stem from this lack of fulfillment. So we're truly working with a double-edged sword here, and that's without even mentioning that approximately 15,000 sheep are killed by dogs every year in the UK. Since there's no scientific consensus that anything other than aversive methods can create the necessary level of avoidance to keep your dog safe from and to livestock, why do we still turn our nose up at e-collars? A common rebuttal I receive here is, well, just put your dog on lead around sheep. That's fine. But unfortunately, most of these attacks occur when the owner isn't present. While I agree it's always best to use a lead around livestock, equipment fails, as too does human judgment. Here's a personal example of the time I was caught off guard. Hi there, I'm just wondering if you have a deer costume.
Deer?
A deer, like a doe a deer.
A doe a deer? Do I have a deer? I don't think I have a deer.
What's the closest thing you've got to a deer?
Let me have a look. Town, I think I'd suggest calling our town shop because they might have some reindeers.
I'm just round the corner from your Headingley shop, so anything, any four-legged mammal will do, really.
Well, zebras.
Zebra,
leopards,
yep, sound.
cow, yeah.
You got zebras?
Zebras, leopards, cows, yeah.
Sound, I'll come and get a zebra. Thanks a lot.
Okie dokie,
Cheers.
mate.
One day I was walking my 4 dogs in a private fence field that belonged to us. Usually a peaceful place with only a few small animals around to distract them, making it the perfect spot to let the dogs run free between training sessions. For all intents and purposes, it should be as safe as it gets to let my dogs off lead, regardless if their recall was perfect or not. And just as we were wrapping up a game of fetch, a deer suddenly darted out of the bushes. I had no idea how it got there. And thankfully, even though my dogs weren't wearing e-collars at the time, because my dogs had been trained that recall isn't optional with the use of an e-collar, they chose not to chase the deer. The deer, on the other hand, decided to scale a 6-foot fence and dart into the road, fortunately without incident. So is it really as simple as just putting our dog on the lead every time there's a potential of a high-value distraction? If you're in my shoes, that could be any time. If I'm not able to have my own dogs roam free in my own private fenced-off field, where can I? I'd have to keep my dogs on a lead at all times, and then we'd be back to square one. E-collars can be incredibly effective, but only when applied thoughtfully. Yes, they can be dangerous if misused, and yes, they can worsen problems in the wrong hands. However, when used correctly and under the guidance of experienced professionals, they provide a level of safety and freedom that other training methods often can't. As you've probably realized by now, I am an advocate of e-collars. Specifically, I support the careful introduction to allow dogs more freedom and keep them safe. I've seen it work time and time again with my own 2 eyes. And in a world where we have growing populations of both dogs and humans and less space for dogs to roam freely, it's harder than ever to provide dogs with an enriched and fulfilling life while keeping them safe and protecting those around them. So the choice is yours as a dog owner. For me, momentary discomfort is a small price to pay for a lifetime of freedom, safety, and enriching experiences for my dogs. Ultimately, it comes down to the handler's intentions. Are we using an e-collar as a tool to enable our dogs more freedom, or are we using it to suppress behaviors that are created from the lack of freedom? That question, in my view,
determines whether the tool is cruel or not. And if you've enjoyed this video where I dissect training methods, then let me know in the comments if you'd like a deeper dive on e-collars or even other popular methods. Remember, it's the fool, not the tool.